All right. Well, welcome this afternoon to the third training in our ANR and Ag Educator series, Grain and Confined Space Safety Training for Ag Educators. Today we have with us Sam McNeil. Dr. Sam McNeil is an extension professor in the Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering Department at the University of Kentucky, and he's stationed at the Research and Education Center in Princeton. He is a registered professional engineer in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. His extension and research program focuses on post-harvest processing of grain and biomass crops for food, feed, fiber, and fuel production. And he has extensive experience working with the design, operation, and management of on-farm grain drying and storage facilities. He has authored numerous extension publications, including topics on harvesting, drying, and storing corn, both conventional and organic, canola, grain sorghum, soybean, and soft red winter wheat, as well as aflatoxin control in corn. That's something new to me, Sam. I don't know if I pronounced that right. He has also developed several unique spreadsheet tools to easily calculate the equilibrium moisture content of 16 grains and oil seeds, corn drying, grain seeding, hauling costs, and the storage capacity of commonly used structures, all of which are available on the UK BAE website, which I'll share with you here in a second. As an active member of the American Society of Agricultural and Biological Engineer since 1979. He is currently a member of several technical committees, including grain drying and storage, biomass products, agricultural energy use, and extension education. Recent activities had focused on providing technical assistance for energy efficiency projects in Kentucky, validating a new method to assess the inventory of stored grain in farm bins and elevator silos, and reducing post-harvest losses of grains in West Africa, specifically Nigeria and Ghana, to provide food security to the region. Sam is a fantastic colleague, and we're so excited to have him presenting with us today. Thanks, Sam.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. Thanks for the introduction. The only part I would add to that is when I started, I was very young. So, but thank you for those that are in attendance. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, and I do have a lot of slides I want to go through that fairly quickly. But Carolyn mentioned our website that's shown there at the bottom of the screen, uky.edu/BAE. That's where you can find my publications and spreadsheet tools. And as you can tell by the introduction, I'm not a bona fide quote unquote safety specialist per se, but I have certainly worked around grain systems for 40 plus years, and I've climbed around grain bins and become more aware of the safety aspects involved in that, and actually implemented them myself as I've learned more about it. So I'm coming to you with a little personal experience on the safety side, as well as certainly being interested in this topic from my research and extension programs. So I want to start a little bit by sharing, for those of you who aren't familiar with our state, we have some out of state in the audience, but so University of Kentucky is located in Lexington, which is near the center part of the state, east central part, midway between Cincinnati and Knoxville, or thereabouts. They're on I-75, but if you look west, and I'm showing that here in the red circle, is Princeton, where I'm located. The University of Kentucky has a research and education center there, and we house specialists from 7 different colleges, departments in the College of Agriculture, food and environmental systems. So it's been a great place to work. It's where I've been spent most of my career. This is the facility as it appeared on the morning of December 10th, 2021. Unfortunately, there was a tornado that came from the south that destroyed that building, but we are building back, and we're still active in our programs at that facility, and the farm is active in this research. So we're very fortunate that even though we had a catastrophic loss, no lives were lost in that incident in our station or in our community there in Princeton. And this is where we're located. So some of the topics that we want to talk about today, just start off by describing some of the grain dust explosions that have occurred in the United States, not so much on the farm, but more in commercial elevators, and we'll talk about why that's the case. But more importantly, I think on the farm level is we're exposed to a lot of dust, sometimes pesticide applications, and not too many in the public would be exposed to fumigation applications, but I want to make you aware of the hazards involved certainly, and the safety precautions that need to be taken for those applications. We want to talk a little bit about working in confined space. That is certainly a topic that was built up for the title of this presentation. And I did find some research that has been done to document those cases as well as confinement and entrapment cases as well across the country by state. And I'll share that data. Other hazards that are involved in grain handling are climbing, and of course we're and again, I've climbed many ladders up to grain on grain bins, and I haven't always used a safety harness, but I certainly do now. And there have been some deaths that have been associated with falls from grain bins and other structures around the farm and other industries. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the injuries associated with heavy lifting or lifting heavy objects, but I will share a slide or two that I have from West Africa that demonstrates some of the heavy lifting that's done there, and just in the way they do things there. A little different certainly in the US. I do want to talk about suffocation potential in bulk grain, and I've got I'll insert a short video that describes how grain unloads from a bin, and just to help you understand the dangers involved with that activity. Then we want to look at other hazards that are commonly associated with grain handling. Is any tripping hazards that may be around our grain bins or handling equipment. Anytime we're working on any electrical system, certainly we need to de-energize that, and I'll share a little bit of data from other occupations that the severity of that particular risk. Then we all know that any and all of these can lead to lost time and wages, but in worst case, death to when things are not done properly or done safely. So let's shift a little bit, or shift quickly then to the topic of grain dust explosions. There are 5 elements that are involved in grain dust explosion, and all of these need to be present. Certainly the first thing is a fuel source, and here we're talking about just grain dust itself. It's high in starch and it's highly combustible. Obviously, you would need oxygen, but you would also need a spark or a heat source. And I'll share a little bit of data as to what some of the sources have been from some of the explosions that have been observed. In most cases, the explosion have been so violent that they have not been able to really identify the source, but where they can, they have done so, and I'll share that. You also need confinement. You need a right concentration of this dust for it to be a hazard. And then if you have dispersion, it can lead to a secondary explosion as well. And you can see some of these on some of the, if you get on YouTube and search for grain dust explosions, you can see some of the ones that have been captured, and I'll show you a few screenshots from those. But just to share a little data on, this is from Purdue University. They have collected data from several incidents that we talked about there on the first list. And this is over quite a long time span, 95 to 2014, but it's just the number of explosions that have occurred in the United States. And again, it's across the country. We can see, a wide range, anywhere from as few as 7 or so, 6 or 7, to as many as 19. And it's difficult to understand why there doesn't seem to be a real pattern here, but it's real random. But at the same time, these can be quite violent, and in some cases, they have been they caused several deaths at the same site. There have been a few in Kentucky, but not many. But most of the occurrences actually are in the Midwestern states, where there's a lot of large grain handling systems and elevators. I guess the one positive we can take from this is that the first 10 years, the average was a little above 10 incidents per year, and now it's a little below that, or right at 10 incidents per year. So through awareness and education, we are seeing some decline in those. I mentioned we would take a look quickly at some of the ignition sources, and again, you can see that in most cases they're really not known, but the ones that have been identified are listed here. Again, can be just as simple as a spark from a worn out bearing that would cause an explosion. But to kind of illustrate an incident that has been recorded on a farm situation, we're looking at an incident here in Indiana, and from left to right, this is a time span occurred probably about 5 seconds, where the bin itself on the far left slide there is shown it started to fail, probably had an offloading problem inside the bin, and caused a shift on the wall and caused a collapse. But when that dust and debris came down, on the way down, it came in contact with the electrical panel, and that's where you had the spark. So you wouldn't consider this to be so much of a confined space, but due to the heavy concentration on the far right slide there, you can see that there was in fact a bit of an explosion. And then picking up from that slide, same slide here on the left, it started to spread, and within seconds there was a burst of fire, but it quickly dissipated. And fortunately, no one was injured in this. They saw it when they saw the bin falling, that they quickly cleared away. But then you can see on the far right slide here that literally after dust settled, there was not a lot of damage to the facility, or near as much as there could have been. Fortunately, the fire did not spread. So there was one instance there that was kind of recent and a bit unusual to see, and it was caused in that case by a bin failure. What's more common is in this realm is to see this is a video on the upper left. There's a video from YouTube that was taken from I think from a security camera across the street from an elevator in Iowa, and it captured the incident itself. And is fortunately there were no deaths in that incident, but you can see the violence of it, and they can start. Just flying debris can be a problem as well from that. Probably the most historic incident in this example would be in Kansas, an grain elevator in Kansas in 1998, but there were several deaths on the site due to the explosion in the head space there. There was a confined. You can see the bucket elevator was enclosed in a housing, and that allowed the concentration to build up there. Well, that was the case on that. Again, most historic explosion in Kansas. Switch gears a little bit to talk about non-fatal injuries and illnesses, and again, this is by industry. These statistics were available from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but kind of wanted to share some of the things that are near and dear to Kentucky, tobacco and the spirits industry. But there's some of the total cases of just injuries that have occurred across the U.S. and by age group. I mean, just to show and share that data is available if you have interest in looking at that, and it is pretty well parsed out there in specific industries within the beverage industry, for example. But taking a more serious look here at, I have a few slides to share some of the fatalities that have occurred across the U.S. from these injuries and incidences and hazards. Again, this is across the board for all types of incidents, but looking at the workplace fatalities per 100,000 workers from 70 to 2013, you can see that there was a sharp decline for the first 20 years, and it kind of leveled off from 1990 on forward. And now it's down around 4, whereas before it was about that many per year, declining. So we're making improvements in that regard in terms of safety. This slide is really busy, but on the left, I want to show the number and rate of fatal work injuries by industry. This is for one particular year, 2015 as it happens, but again, this information is available through the Bureau of Labor Statistics for other years if you have interest in looking at that. On the left, the orange bars look at the total number of fatalities by occupation. And we're looking at construction as being highest, transportation, warehousing, second, and in agriculture in general, to include forestry, fisheries, and hunting, third on the list. But if you look to the right, and that is the fatal work injuries rate, and that is a number per 100,000 full-time equivalent workers. Agriculture is in the top of the list, well, again, to include forestry, fishing, and hunting, but around 23 fatalities per 10,000 to 100,000 workers. And then that's followed by transportation, mining, and then construction. So again, there's a lot of information that kind of breaks it down by occupation. This is looking at the same numbers, but in a more recent year, 2015, and it compares it to fatalities in 2014. So the tan states, the states shown in tan on this map, are actually had an increase from the previous year. So comparing 2015 to 2014, you can see that in Kentucky, we had 99 fatal injuries for all occupations in that particular year. And how that compares with the neighboring states. And then in 2019, we actually had a slight decrease. So comparing, again, looking at Kentucky, that color indicated there is a little different, but to say that we were reduced from 83 fatalities per 100,000 workers to 78 in that particular year. Excuse me. And then the last thing I want to look at in this line of data is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics is incidences by occupation, by fatalities. And you can see here that heavy tractor trailers are the number one, have the number one, the highest level, I guess I'll say, in of all those shown here, whereas agriculture is second. But yeah, an interesting thing here, you don't think about it too much, but trips, falls, and slips are fairly common in construction, to include carpentry, and in commercial construction, private construction. So, but then again, the number one cause of fatalities here is related to transportation, as it's shown in the dark blue across all occupations. Again, if you have interest in seeing more data along those, I'll point you to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So I want to go now to some of the instances I've seen, some of the hazards I've been exposed to, and try to avoid now, and try to protect myself from. And that is the number one thing is grain dust. When you're looking in and around grain facilities, you're going to be exposed to grain dust. And grain dust includes not just the dust in the material itself, but also it can include and carry with it some mold spores, which can cause some problems, compound respiratory problems for the victims or people that be exposed to it. You might guess that the slide on the left was not in the US, but it was actually in Africa, where they're loading and offloading some grain in bags and dumping it into a conveyor. So in any time you have that close contact with the grain itself, you're going to have exposure to dust. On the right is actually a rescue operation in Illinois, and you see most responders in this case do have dust protection and respiratories. They're wearing a type of respirator, whereas on the left they are not. And that's one of the educational points we make there when we're traveling and working in Africa. But taking a look at a typical farm situation where you're offloading grain from a truck into a pit. Farmers seen on the left here, you can see there is quite a heavy load of dust in that instance. Several devices can be used to protect yourself from that dust, as well as not just your lungs, but also your eyes and maybe your ears, depending on the equipment that's involved. But one thing I do point out is that masks that have a single strap do not have a good enough fit and should probably be avoided around that environment. The mask shown on the right here with a rubber construction would probably give you a better fit and better protection. We'll take a look at some other options here as we go along, but just to kind of drive this point a little further, I think I would consider that a what we're all used to wearing now, an N95 mask. This is, of course, we were talking about this before COVID, but that certainly falls into play and coincides with similar concerns, where an N95 can protect you from dust and as well as the mold spores. But that's really a kind of a minimal protection. Better level of protection is where you have a silicone or a rubber bodied respirator that's got a couple of filters on it. Which they give you more surface area for filtering the air that's coming in. And then the maximum type of control would be for self-contained breathing apparatus, and that would be used for environments where there's a low oxygen supply and you had to carry your own oxygen. I'll show you an example of that. But just a little, I guess, comparison of different types of respirators that are available and costs that are associated with them. The two-strap disposable mask you see the upper left here are fairly inexpensive, and they do offer good protection. As in, it's not a heavy load, and you have plenty of oxygen, of course. And they can be used more than once if you protect them well. And I would suggest putting them in a Ziploc bag or well-sealed plastic bag to protect them from aging and protect the straps. You can get a few more uses out of them that way. So the other masks that are shown here are respirators, would be a rubber or silicone body, and they have one or more filters on them that could give you a lot of protection. And some of the filters that would be available on these respirators would be protect you from vapors and dust, as well as organic vapors or fumes. Believe it or not, there is a series of steps that certainly that OSHA has published that I'll share here with you, that the proper way to fit a mask to your face. Obviously, this individual doesn't have glasses and he doesn't have facial hair, so that makes things a little easier. But the first thing you really want to do is just kind of get a general feel if it's going to fit you well, and then put the top strap above your ear first, and then the bottom strap below the ear as a fourth step, and then to see that you have a good fit around the nose and around the sides of the mask to give you good protection. And some masks have an ability to tighten up the straps a little bit to give you a good fit, and that would give you, as I said, pretty good protection for dust and mold spores. So again, it's much of what we're used to wearing since we've had COVID in our lives and had to worry about that. A second type of mask or respirator that I have used often, that I use fairly often, is would be the respirator that's shown here. Some of these may have be connected with an eye shield as well, but this respirator has two filters on it, and that gives you plenty of surface area for breathing, and doesn't restrict your breathing at all. So it gives you good protection. So again, similar type of procedure here, where you would kind of hold it in front of you to see if you're going to get a good fit, and then pull the top strap over your ears. And then in this case, the bottom strap actually has a clip that you can attach behind your neck, and then you can pull those straps in to give you a good fit. And that would be advised if you need a little more protection than what the disposable respirators can offer. Full face respirators are, I guess I'd say, the next level of protection you might consider if you're going to be in an environment where the fumes might be a problem. Then you need to protect your eyes. This would preclude having to wear glasses. You may need to have, well, it works well for folks that have contacts. For myself, have to do something a little different. But these full face masks do give you good protection as well. You so protect the face as well as the lungs. Now, the gas mask that we're showing here would be more for low oxygen environments. Sorry, no, for gaseous environments. And in any case, you might have toxic fumes, and they could filter that out. But so the next device I want to show is for a third, or I guess a third or fourth choice here. We have immediate protection. We have air filters. These filters actually provide the most protection where you have plenty of oxygen, but you might have a heavy dust load, for example. But the filters are so tight that you need a battery to force air through the filter and then into the helmet or into the mask, in this case on the right, so you could have a good clean environment to work in. And these are a little more expensive, of course, but they offer quite a bit of protection from heavy loads of dust. Anytime you're working with a modified atmosphere, or a case where you might have a suspicion of a low oxygen level, you would want to certainly invest in a gas detector. These can be battery powered handheld devices that are fairly inexpensive compared to some others that are available, but certainly when we're talking about protecting life, is a very good investment. But these devices could give you an indication if there's enough oxygen in the space. And the next thing we want to talk about is confined spaces, and that's where it really comes into play. But these detectors can also indicate if there's other gases involved that you need to be worried about, in which case you might need a self-contained breathing apparatus, as we're showing here. And these can be very expensive, they're very cumbersome, they're very heavy, but they do offer you the maximum protection, and it's definitely what you need if you're going in an environment where there's a low oxygen level or a gas that you do not need to be exposed to. So that covers it pretty well for respirators. There are some test standards that need to be adhered to if you're in a commercial setting, and you need to get a fit test and a medical evaluation to be sure that you are physically able to sustain kind of the physical rigor of wearing a tight-fitting mask. So that's one precaution. There are some research reports that have been out there to indicate the interaction between dust exposure and lung diseases. Some of us associated with smoking even, but and just to let you know that there is some research in this area. It's not a widely published area, but there are some reports out there, and they can give you some guidance on I guess some of the hazards involved, as well as some of the methods to control dust in the environment. One in particular is to use soybean oil to control dust, or you might spray that on a conveyor belt, for example, to reduce the dust load. Many of the devices I'm talking about, the equipment, can be purchased commercially, and sources that would be familiar to you to find out where you can get some of the personal protection equipment if you are interested in. We want to shift now and talk about confined spaces. No, it's you don't think of a grain bin as a confined space, but certainly if you look at the definition, and that's what we really need to kind of work within, it's any space that's small, it has a small entry, so it doesn't have a doorway necessarily, but it has a small entry and exit area, but it's large enough to work in, but it's not designed to be occupied continuously. So that's kind of a general definition. And some examples here would be grain bin, but also fermentation tanks, liquid storage tanks, or even dump pits where you would be in a small area. So confined spaces can be large and it can be small. I do want to share an example that to drive this point home, there's an example from a dairy farm. I believe it was up in Illinois some years ago, but there was a worker went in to replace a broken ball valve to empty that tank. So he And after they had it empty, he wanted to go and repair it. But there were some fumes in there, and he was not aware of that. So he entered through a manhole-sized cover, a 16-inch diameter, and then he was a coworker decided we're going to at the same time they were going to climb on an adjacent storage bin to monitor the progress, and as you wisely would do. But then as soon as he looked back, the worker that was inside the tank was already lying face down. So he quickly called 911. The fire department showed up, they responded, they cut a hole in the tank and retrieved the work back. I mean, at that point, it was too late. The fellow had already passed from, had been overcome by the fumes, and it was a recovery effort at that point. But the take-home lesson was to absolutely be sure of all the hazards that would be in that type of an environment, and not to enter the space without a work permit or proper supervision. That would be the case in any commercial operation. And what we can use on the farm is what those guidelines is in managing our operations on the farm. So again, this is just to show the tank itself in this case. And I mean, it was fairly large inside, but at the same time, there's a high enough concentration that worker was overcome by the fumes. Of course, the hole through there was worked done after the fire department cut that out. So Purdue University has a log of data that goes back to 1962 and spans through 2021. Most recent professional meeting, they gave the most recent statistics for 2021, but look at their website, you can find these maps. This is the number of instances of confined spaces, some confined space cases, that is, for the time span. In a white box by state is a number for 2020. So in Kentucky, there have been a total of 19 cases of confined space fatalities, and in 2020 there was one fatality related to that, and it happened to be a grain entrapment, or a grain bin accident. But so they have this is a general map for confined spaces, and then there's also a map I'll show later for entrapments by state. And if you look a little more broadly at what causes confined space incidences, you see not too surprisingly that grain storage facilities comprises the majority of cases, followed by manure or storage handling structures, like the tank would be like the tank we saw previous slide. Silos have also been the cause of some fatalities, again because of the gases that are generated in a silo. And then there have been a few cases where just grain transport vehicles have created some entrapment, some cases. The insert I've shown here is just an example of a rescue up in Illinois, where you can see the level of effort required to extract anyone that would be confined or been trapped in a grain storage bin. And we'll take a little bit more, take a look at some of the data on that as we go along. But in general, confined spaces, again, this is back to the Purdue data that shows the total number of cases of confined spaces that have been reported. But then in the lower part of each bar graph here is the grain entrapment itself. So you can see a grain entrapment comprises a large component, just again as indicated in the previous slide. We have seen a decline, fortunately, from the first 4 years shown on the map was around 70 or above. The line is showing a 5-year moving average. More recently, it's been reduced to about 60 or so. So we are making some improvements, and a large part of that is awareness. But again, like some of the other data I've shown, it's fairly variable, and you just have to be vigilant at all times. If you look at the confined space incidents in 2020 as an example, kind of just more recent data, again, you can see the grain entrapments, 35 total incidents, and then on the top of these graphs is a number of fatalities associated with each incident. Falls, again, a total of 7 with 3 deaths associated with that in 2020. And this again, this is nationwide. So again, just to look to show, I wanted to share with you some of the data that's available from, as you can extract from the information that Purdue puts out. Now, Princeton University has published a more or less a worksheet that you can use for entry permits for confined spaces, and this would be a good guideline, I think, for use on a farm level. But in industry, this is strictly adhered to, and in universities, this is strictly adhered to, and you have to fully justify why you would need to enter a confined space, as well as document when it's done, what needs to be done, if it was done, if the task was fully completed, or if it needed another visit needed to be made to complete the task and the goal, say as a repair or something like that. But they just want you to share some of the guidelines on the details involved. Certainly part of the procedure is to be sure that the people in the space have the proper protection equipment, as we've talked about here. Now we want to shift a little bit to slips, trips, and falls, and it's a little surprising to me when I looked into this, the number of fatalities that are associated with this, but certainly around grain bins, as we'll show in the following slides, why this might be the case. But again, this is across all occupations. Take-home message here is that on average for this 9-year period, we're showing at 800 deaths across country from just slips, trips, and falls alone. And that number does not look to be diminishing at all, unfortunately. So just people need to be aware to keep trip hazards out of the workspace. Now, these are some of the bins that I'm showing next that I've taken from my collection, and just to illustrate and show some of the equipment that I've climbed around on in my career. But I hope you can see on the far left side, this bin on the far left, is this an open ladder that goes straight up the wall of the bin. And then as you continue on, there's some rungs of angle iron that are bolted to the roof ribs to climb into the very top of the bin. That's the way most of the bins on the farms are built. And I'll show you some improvements. One is shown in this slide, actually, where you have towards the center right of the slide, a circular kind of it's a staircase, inclined staircase with a rail that goes along the side of the bin. These are much easier to climb and a lot safer. So we're seeing more of those being installed. While I have this slide up, I wanted to show also the bucket elevator is shown in the center, and we'll talk about some improvements that have been made in climbing those very tall structures. Climbing certainly involves also grain dryers. Some of the tower dryers that we're seeing on farms these days are quite a challenge to climb, and they have, by design, they have resting stations between different levels. You can see toward the center of this slide, the image on the left is a vertical slide or vertical ladder that goes up the side of the dryer for you need to check it for different things and clean it. But then over to the left there, you see that there's actually a cage, not just on the vertical ladder, but also going up to the top of the dryer itself. And these are what we're seeing more for bins and dryers. Just to the right of that, you'll see the bucket elevator that's got a vertical ladder on it with rest stations and a platform at various heights. And there's been some improvements on that as well. And compare that then to the bin on the right, which shows a cage around the ladder and then resting stations as you go up. You cannot have a one straight shot up the bin as it used to be made. and this is very difficult to see, but again, this is the same ladder, bucket elevator we saw on the previous slide on the left, but then on the right, there is an inclined staircase around the frame of the support structure for the bucket elevator. And that's an improvement certainly, and easier to climb. And of course, with any time you're more than 6 feet off the ground, it's a good idea to have a climbing harness, and then you would need to clip that up once you get to your workstation and attach that to something solid. Again, just kind of another close-up look at ladders, modern ladders and cages and railings that are used in bins these days. And then what I prefer when you have the chance is to have a staircase on the side of the bin, and then maybe in this case where you can align the bins where you get one staircase would actually serve 2 bins, and there's a really laid out design. So anytime you, as I mentioned, anytime you get to your destination on a ladder, on your climb, you need to lock off or tie off to a secure spot. So if you do fall, you're not going to pull the ladder with you. And there have been some structural improvements made to bins that have allowed and provided and facilitated anchorage points for structures. Now I'll take a look at that later. Also want to include certainly in the discussion grain dryers. You don't think about that so much, but dryers as big as they are, not just the tower dryers, but other crossflow dryers would be high enough off the ground. You need to have some fall protection to climb around there. Now, I just have the one slide here to illustrate my point on heavy lifting. And again, this is not a very common problem in the US, but some of the incidences I saw in Africa were quite extreme. And as an example, the gentleman on the left here is carrying a 100 kg bag, that's 220 pounds of grain. He's carrying it on his head, and you don't want to try this at home. Obviously, this is widely done in Africa, not so much on the head, but they carry it on their shoulder, but it's to carry very heavy loads. And they are starting to transition into smaller packages. Example, one on the slide on the right, you're looking at 100-pound bags and a crew of workers to help position the bag onto if someone might carry it from the scale to the truck, and then from there to load it and stack it on the truck. It's just an extreme example there, but again, most of our grains are handled in bulk and not in bags, so it's one reason certainly is to make the job a lot easier. So I want to switch now to talk about entrapment and hazards involved in the flowing grain. And we'll start then from here. We'll want to switch to a video which shows the way grain unloads from the bin by gravity.
Sam, were you hoping to pull up the demo?
Is it not showing?
It's not showing.
Well, we can go on. It's showing on my screen, but
Well, I'm
Thank
happy to share it. I have it.
okay, well,
You want the demo, correct?
yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I thought you could see this.
You're cool. Can you see my screen?
I can't get this one.
Center like most bins are, and they need to be
Yes.
because then you get a uniform decompression of the pressure that wants to, so when a bin's loaded, it wants to push those walls out.
Carolyn?
As it's unloaded, it's causing.
Yes. Sam,
Yes.
do you see Carolyn? I'm sorry, I thought you interrupted me and wanted to tell me something.
Well, I'm not seeing,
You're not
am
seeing
I,
the,
am I looking at your screen?
yes,
Okay. Sorry.
okay,
Somewhat of a negative pressure on the surface and on the walls. That has something to do with that first example I showed, with it being collapsed on the farm. They had some kind of a flow problem inside that bin that caused it to be off center, and it caused the bin to fail and fall. In this case, we have what we call a tall slender bin. So it's taller than it is wide, essentially. Okay. If in most grain silos, concrete silos are have similar dimensions, the width to the height ratio is similar. In that case, when you're unloading grain, it unloads uniformly. And you won't see any, but after it gets down to about this level or maybe a little lower, it starts what we call a funnel flow. And that's where the problem can come in, because then you can get trapped in that flow. And it's easily demonstrated here. So I hope this is.
we're having some tech hiccups here, aren't we? Let's see if we can get this to buffer.
Yeah. Well, I might be able to describe it so we can,
Okay. Move
Yeah.
on. I'm sorry about that.
okay. You see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, we wanted to try to demonstrate how grain flows out of a normal farm bin. Essentially, it flows in a funnel, as we're showing on this graphic, and it acts kind of like quicksand, really. But if you're standing anywhere near the center, you're going to get pulled down into that flow, and there's some serious implications there, obviously. And this is where some deaths have occurred in the past. Most folks now obviously know that you should never enter a bin where grain is flowing, and because this is what can happen. And actually, one of our former graduate students did some work with mannequins, life-size mannequins, and looked at the forces involved, not just on the victim, but also what it would take to extract the victim at different depths. If they were, say, buried to their waist, buried to their head, or below. And as it happens, you don't have very much time at all to react if you're inside a bin where the grain is flowing, because you have a matter of just a seconds. And as shown on the side on the left here, or this image on the left, you just, you'd be like walking on shifting sand, essentially, and very difficult to walk. But you would not be able to pull away from that because of the forces involved. And then if the flow were to stop and they would try to extract you, you just have to work against the weight of the person, as well as the forces of the grain exerted on the legs and the lower. Anywhere the grain is in contact with the body, you have to overcome those forces. And those are shown on the right. So if you're buried up to the neck, for example, in the second image shown there, on the image on the right, you'd have to overcome not just a person's weight, but 460 pounds of additional weight due to the forces of the grain on that individual. So it's not, you can't do that safely. Even if they have a harness on, you're still not going to be able to pull them out of the grain. So obviously caution is advised. Another instance that can occur is if grain has been unloaded from a bin and maybe the worker's not aware of that, but there could be a cavity that's actually formed. If you have a crusted grain or spoiled grain on the surface, you might think it's solid enough to hold your weight, but oftentimes obviously may not be. So that could collapse. Even if there's grain is not flowing out of the bin, you can still have a problem. If there has been a cavity formed underneath the surface in the cases shown in this example. A more common problem is where we have grain that's been spoiled and stuck to the wall. This was actually the most recent incident in Kentucky was associated with this type of situation. But the worker was trying to dislodge the grain from the wall and it avalanched and buried him. And he suffocated before they could extract him from that accident, that situation. So take home point is you always want to work in pairs. You always want to wear the proper protection equipment, PPE. This would include certainly a harness. I would think that work on the left shown here would be wanting to put wear some dust protection as well. I have to say the picture on the right was taken many years ago. They are working in pairs. They don't have the right climbing gear, but this is actually preparing the bin for fumigation. So they had a lot of equipment to haul up to get ready for that. But the point is, you definitely want to work in pairs and not alone. So this is an incident near Princeton in my office some years ago, where a fellow was in the bin by himself. He went out to load a truck one morning and didn't come back to breakfast right away. So they got a little concerned and went to check on him, and he had gotten trapped up to about, I believe, about his chest. He was not submerged, so this is a rescue and extraction, and I happened to be on the scene after they'd called 911, obviously, and you have all manner of vehicles that come to a farm when that happens, but we had EMS, we had a fire truck, more than one, because that one truck there had a ladder on it that they were using to assist in the rescue. I actually took that picture before the helicopter arrived, but so I guess point is it got pretty busy around the farm that day. But as EMS, they acted as quickly as they could, and they did the right steps. They were properly trained on extraction procedures. So they cut holes in the bin, different equal distance from either side to withdraw the grain from the victim. And so the image I'm showing here, they removed him on a backboard from the hole that they had to cut there in the bottom of that spot. And he was sent to the hospital. We checked out, and he was fine. That was he didn't have any injury associated with that at all. But when the crowd kind of cleared out, I slipped around in the hole and looked up to see what the problem was, and it was he had some spoiled grain that blocked the flow. And when they were trying to unload and move him, it kind of shifted and pinned him, but they were able to get him out safely. And that's I guess that's the part really that makes this story easy to tell, but at the same time, raise awareness on, keeping the grain in good condition through storage and monitoring it well, so you don't have a problem like this to start with. But also the precautions we always talk about in terms of checking grain condition. You don't want to work alone. Now, had the rescue team had a cofferdam, they probably could have saved themselves a lot of work, because again, they didn't have to get all the grain out of that bin to remove him. But if you shore up the area around the victim, you can oftentimes remove the grain just in that space. And there are many cases and many opportunities to witness a mock rescue by emergency management teams around the state. Kentucky Ag Department sponsors those and promotes those, has those often in the summertime. Oftentimes you'll see this at the farm machinery show as well, to illustrate the different devices that are used to form a cofferdam. Some of the design elements that are shown here would be made so they could be, put into the bin in parts and pieces, and then you can assemble it around the victim once he's in. And this works well if the victim is not submerged. Obviously, different case, different scenario if the victim is submerged. But for rescues, these cofferdams work very well. Some can be made on the farm. There are design plans where you can build it yourself, but many commercial ones available as well. And again, many EMS teams around different counties in the state have procured these either from grant funds from the ag department or other sources. Last thing I want to talk about here is what's referred to more as a lifeline system setup. This would be where you would have a strong anchor point to the bin. Many older bins don't have as I talked about earlier, they don't have a really secure place to attach a lifeline. This is critical in the system so that you don't damage equipment or don't put the victim or put the worker at risk, where if there is an incident and you have to rely on that harness, there is certainly enough structure there to support the weight. And again, we talked about the weights involved. So again, just kind of summing up, looking at grain entrapments. Again, this is back to the Purdue data for nationwide statistics. Over 11-year period here, we're looking at, and again, the 5-year average. The recent data I saw on this for 2021 was actually the same as 2016. So the moving average was still around 30 for that time span. And again, Purdue collects this data every year, and they put out a report for that to keep track of these statistics. And just we talked about confined spaces. This takes part of that out for grain entrapments alone by state. And again, for Kentucky, over this time span of 62 to 2020, there have been 13 incidences total. This is a fairly low number compared to other states in the Midwest, certainly where there are more elevators, there are more incidences of accidents and entrapments. But then, so in 2020, again, that was the incident in Western Kentucky for that year. So, in wrapping up, if you're and there are oftentimes there's good reason to go in a bin to check the condition of the grain so that you don't have a problem that we saw earlier in that one instance there. where we have a blockage in the flow. But if you go in a bin, you want to be sure and lock out and tag out the unloading conveyor. You want to use a climbing harness, you want to use a respirator. You want to be sure someone's outside the bin to monitor activity. Inside, you want to avoid the center of the bin where all the movement of grain would be. If there's a cavity, for example, it's a good idea to have a cofferdam on the side, I think, and certainly a fully charged cell phone on this before you go out there to call for help if needed. And the image on the right I just inserted there is an illustration of the lockout tagout devices that might be used to de-energize unloading equipment before you go in the bin. There are lots of resources available out there, including the Southeast Center for Ag Health and Injury Prevention in UK, but also our department, also the Agricultural Union Department, National Ag Safety Database, other sources that I've shared in this presentation. On the grain side, there are some very active programs around the Midwest, both in university level, private industry, and government agencies that work in this realm of grain safety. And most of it in many cases, the bottom line is if you can keep the grain in good condition, a lot of times you won't have flow problems and won't have a need to go in and put yourself at risk in the first place. So that's the number one goal, really. And then again, just closing out, university. These are some of the universities that have very active program in post-harvest engineering. And I've also listed some other states there that have a Center for Ag Health and Safety, including a Canadian source there. So that concludes what we wanted to talk about today. I think we're a little over, so I apologize for that. But if you have any questions, you can reach out to me there on the office number or email that's shown on the slide. And thank you again.